Hello, my name's Alex Adkins and I'm the Senior Strategic Land Use Planner at Monaro Regional Council. I'm just going to take you through a community presentation on the draft Local Strategic Planning Statement. So what is an LSPS? An LSPS, or Local Strategic Planning Statement, is required under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, Section 3.9, and it's an overarching strategic document for the region. It gives effect to our regional plan, which is the South Eastern Tablelands Regional Plan, and must have regard for the community strategic plan. The document has to set out the planning priorities for the region, and it must also have actions and indicators to monitor the implementation of the document. So it can't just be a document which sits on the shelf, it has to actually have that implementation aspect as well, and most of that's found in Appendix A attached to the document. So in terms of the overarching sort of New South Wales strategic planning hierarchy, we've got the state documents and other sort of statewide strategic planning documents, the regional plan, which is South Eastern Tablelands Regional Plan in this instance, and then the local strategic planning statement, which is our local sort of overarching strategic plan for the Snowy Monaro. There are strategy documents, and then later on will come the local environmental plan and development control plan, which are our implementation documents. Up until recently, there's been a missing link with the local strategic planning in terms of this hasn't been required, but other councils have previously done that, and it's very important in showing that line of sight from a statewide strategic document down to the local level. So in terms of our internal process, about this time last year we put out a discussion paper and we had a preliminary consultation session where we took on board a number of different thoughts throughout the region on a whole range of local strategic planning issues. And now we've come up with this local strategic planning statement, which will be our overarching document, so that's where we are at the moment. And then on from there will be the more detailed land use strategies and the settlement strategy and the rural land use strategy, and then those implementation documents with the local environmental plan, DCP, development contributions plan, to come later. So what is the purpose of this presentation? It's just to give a brief overview of the LSPS, what the planning priorities are, an overview of what that means in the local context, and an overview of the actions and implementation process. So we've got the draft 20-year vision. I won't go through that. You can have a read of that and see if it reflects the region. It's been very difficult to capture such a wide and diverse region into a short, concise statement, but I think this goes a long way to showing what sort of the key priorities are for the region and an overall vision of what things could be like in the next 20 years. So in terms of the planning priorities, so we've come up with 4 key themes in our thriving economy, vibrant places to live, work and play, so that's sort of social aspects, infrastructure to support growth and change, and a sustainable environment with a vibrant connection to heritage and culture. So that's sort of your natural environment and your built heritage aspects in that. These themes also align with the community strategic plan and the themes in the South East and Tablelands regional plan. So planning priority 1 is very much focused on promoting, growing and protecting agricultural land. So we're looking at protecting primary agricultural land from future threats, whether those be weeds, land fragmentation, and those sort of aspects, work out where our core sort of productive agricultural lands are and how we can improve productivity of the more marginal agricultural land. So planning priority 2 focuses more on maximising the efficiency and growth of business over the coming years. So as you can see in this graph on the side, by employment, accommodation and food services is by far our largest employer, followed by agriculture, forestry and fishing. So how can we make sort of the economy more diverse into the future and have a bit less of a reliance just on one industry sector for employment. And as you can see, while across the region it varies quite significantly, there are a number of large employers in different sectors. So, and compared to the state average, we're obviously quite high in terms of agriculture, forestry and fishing, and accommodation and food services. So just looking at ways that we can maximise that growth through our land use planning controls into the future, and there are some sort of council will priorities on the side there which are outlined in the document. So planning priority 3 is support the development of the Snowy Mountains as Australia's premier year-round alpine destination, and this is really focused on growing tourism all year round, as opposed to just currently it being focused on the winter peak across those 3 months. And it's really working with the New South Wales government on their special activation precinct, and how those sort of aspects, including the improving the connections up to the mountains, working with other potential tourism sectors, and growing things like agritourism and those sort of aspects, which could be a big growth industry into the future, as tourism is our largest industry by employment, agriculture our second largest. Trying to get those two to work together a bit more through an agritourism type thing is certainly a focus of this document. So use appropriate evidence-based planning controls to respond to a diverse region. This really came out of the preliminary consultation we had about this time last year, in that the region is so diverse and there's so many different aspects to it that a one-size-fits-all approach across the region just clearly isn't going to work. There needs to be different approaches to land use across the region, depending on different drivers, whether those be potential future industry, current industries, lifestyle factors, landscape, existing constraints, whatever they may be. Just an evidence-based approach towards different land use planning, and the potential future industries and current industries are obviously quite diverse across the region, whether it's Jindabyne, which very much has a tourism focus currently, Coomer's more your business and administration, Bombarda's very much agriculture and forestry, and the Canberra corridor, especially Mikalago, and those northern sections where it's Smiths Road are very much influenced by Canberra. So planning priority 5 is provide a variety of housing options throughout the Snowy Monaro, and this is really to respond to changing demands in housing. So as you can see in this graph, it's likely that our population is going to increase in terms of average age by 2036. So the younger age groups are getting less of an overall percentage share in the population, and the older age groups are increasing in terms of their population share, particularly that over 65 age group. This is likely to require different types of housing into the future, more focus on ageing in place options. Also, the average size of households likely to change quite dramatically, and an increase in particular lone person households into the future is likely to require more smaller dwellings. On the flip side of that is a lot of people move to the region for that lifestyle change, and in terms of having more space for a family to grow, and we want to encourage that as well. So having well-planned rural residential communities into the future is very important as well. So it's very much about providing a variety of different houses, in whether that's from medium density and townhouses and terrace houses, dual occupancies, detached sort of single dwellings on urban blocks, through to rural residential and larger blocks of a few acres or hectares for people. So planning priority 6 is identify and integrate transport corridors and connections with the right types and level of development. And this is very much focused on protecting our key transport links into the future and better connecting us with other areas, whether that's upgrades in certain main arterial roads or other regional roads, connecting those sort of freight routes, whether they be down to East Gippsland in Canberra or down the south coast, and potential pressures which will come on the Snowy Mountains Highway with Snowy 2.0 and those sort of aspects, but also encouraging more active transport infrastructure in the townships. People particularly live and work in one township might be more inclined to walk or cycle to work if that infrastructure is in place. And whether there's better ways to connect nationally through whether it's the Snowy Mountains Airport, Canberra International Airport, and internationally with the Port of Eden and potential upgrades there. So planning priority 7 is foster resilient, enduring and safe communities using land use planning controls which address local and regional natural hazards. So a recent one is obviously the bushfires, which are very much in people's minds, and coming up with better ways to respond to bushfires through land use planning controls into the future, whether that's more accurately mapping bushfire risk or whether that's through the new planning for bushfire protection measures. Consider floodplain risk management in land use planning decision making, so getting flood risk management plans in place for all of our townships is of a high priority, so we understand the risk regarding that. Berrydale flooded recently, so the risk is ever present in terms of flooding, not just bushfire. Drought is another natural, significant natural hazard. We've had quite a prolonged drought here, and working out ways to be more resilient to that in future, and better prepared for those sort of events which are likely to become more prevalent into the future. So planning priority 8 is capitalise on growth and change by preparing for new business and population. So this is very much about planning for future growth scenarios, whether they're sort of a low growth scenario, main growth scenario, which is most likely to happen, or a high growth scenario. So if suddenly a lot of people want to move here for some sort of reason, making sure that infrastructure is in place for them, whether it's transport infrastructure, sewer and water infrastructure, electricity infrastructure, just making sure that the infrastructure we have can actually provide for any future growth scenario, and also actively pursuing further business investment, so there's the jobs to employ people who do come to seek a lifestyle here. So planning priority 9 is protect and enhance the cultural and built heritage of the Snowy Monaro. So this is very important. We have a number of areas which are of very high cultural and built heritage value. So whether that's the important sort of Indigenous cultural sites that we have across the region and getting a better understanding of what those are, or the European built heritage that we see in many of the towns and villages across the region. So planning priority 10 is protect and enhance the scenic landscape of the region. This was again something we heard very strongly in the community consultation, that people wanted that scenic landscape to be protected into the future. So working out how best to do that through planning controls, whether that's scenic protection areas, and coming up with policy decisions about large-scale renewable energy projects, so we've got those in the right location so they don't detract from the landscape, and also impacting those sort of areas which have weeds and biosecurity risks, and providing ways to enhance the sort of scenic landscape across the region and provide for the number of tourists who drive through who expect to see that rural landscape when they drive throughout the region. So planning priority 11 is identify, protect and encourage the restoration of specific areas of environmental values in the Snowy Monaro region. So as you can see from this map on the right hand side, this is just showing, you can't really necessarily see the key, but it's just showing all areas of sort of high environmental value, whether that's heritage value or natural environmental value from threatened entities or native vegetation, and that's just showing how many values we have all across the region, and it's important to protect and restore those into the future, and do so in sort of manageable land use controls. So whether that's through land zoning and environmental protection zones, or whether that's through environmental biodiversity overlays and that sort of thing, but also protecting waterways and riparian corridors as well, which is very important for our drinking water supply and also for a number of endangered ecological communities. And finally, Planning Priority 12, which has moved towards a carbon neutral future, and this is really stimulated from the state government's move towards being carbon neutral by 2050. So over on the right hand side there, you've got a outline of what our emissions are on a local level, and this is just carbon emissions, but you can see a lot's taken up by agriculture, obviously being a primarily agricultural area. That's no real surprise, but that's also an important industry to protect. So ways to make that more efficient, perhaps through regenerative agriculture, agroforestry and those sort of things to offset potential carbon input. The orange there, it's not shown, but it's transport emissions. So any ways to bring those down through a move towards new technology, whether that's electric vehicles or more active transport in urban areas into the future. But there's also a lot that council can do internally, so look at ways that it can be more efficient and pollute less into the future just through smart commercial decisions, whether that's upgrading lighting, changing of vehicle fleet, better energy efficiency standards in council buildings. So just on a local perspective, we've got in the document outlines key themes for the key towns, local narratives and character statements for all of the towns and the villages, outlines maintain, enhance and change, so that's focused on the character for the villages and towns, and it'd be really interesting to hear from the community whether we've got those right or whether there's more aspects that you'd like to see in those as either maintain, enhance or change over the next 20 years for your local town or village. Relevant actions driven by the planning priorities, so all of those actions and implementation aspects, and indicative maps about potentially what that could look like on a local level in the next 20 years. So the key themes for the 5 main towns are Cooma as the business and services hub, Jindabyne as the tourism hub, Bombala as a rural industries hub, Berrydale a rural lifestyle hub, and Mikalago as a leadership in sustainability and innovation. So this map here just outlines the 8 key sub-regions in terms of the rural lands in the region. So we've got A as the Canberra corridor, up there with Mikalago and Bredbo, and that's sort of the area just focused on the Monaro Highway, heavily influenced by Canberra, easy access to Canberra within an hour's drive of central Canberra. B, the Eastern Valleys area, which is just this area which extends sort of up from just east of Nimidwell all the way up through that sort of eastern area through Durango and Peakview and those sort of places, which have a very high primary production value, as well as being quite scenic, not as accessible to Canberra, but Canberra still has an influence on those areas. Cooma, which again is a sort of service and business hub. The Monaro, which is characterised particularly by the high soil fertility in that area, is shown by that beigey colour on the map. Bombala, again high soil fertility, but also quite large areas of state forest, which obviously contributes to its forestry and agricultural industry, which has been impacted by the fires but will hopefully recover into the future. Jindabyne, which is this area here, again heavily influenced by tourism, and whether its agricultural lands can become more productive through agritourism and those sort of industries. It's the main feature dividing it from the Monaro. There's the Varney's range through there. Eucumbene, so that's just up there, Adaminabe in Eucumbene, and just wraps around Eucumbene there. Different soils from the Gendavine and the Monaro, and slightly higher elevation through that region. So in H, the Murrumbidgee Mountains area, which is just this area north of the Murrumbidgee River there, so through there, just hugging the ACT. So in terms of the actions and implementation, there are over 80 strategic actions throughout the LSBS. These are all listed in the Appendix A, and also how they can be implemented, so whether that's through the time frame, whether they've been funded or not, their connection to the delivery plan that council has, and their connection to other strategic documents, and also indicators for whether they have been successfully implemented, and to make it easier in terms of reporting that back to council. So in terms of next steps, so any comments or ideas that you want to send us will be taken on board, and will be rolled into the final document, and that will eventually then go on to the more detailed land use planning strategies, which will be out later this year, and then those implementation documents, so in terms of land use controls in the LEP and the DCP. So the detailed settlement strategy and rural land use strategy will be placed on public exhibition later this year, and that will be another opportunity for you to provide comments and feedback. So thank you for listening to this presentation. There's a survey at the bottom of this Your Say page, and if you want to make a submission, please do so in writing before 6 p.m. All submissions should be addressed to the General Manager and sent via the email or the council at email address, or via post. Thank you very much.